over the
Yeah,
United States.
it is interesting because obviously it normally works out that you have a storm and then that storm heads our way.
Exactly, yeah. Um, well, no complaints, and I guess if you're a snow junkie, you're a little upset out in the east, but if you don't like
Oh
snow,
yeah,
then this is
it's
wonderful.
it's definitely hard on those that want snow. I mean, I'm a snow lover, but I realize that this is how it's going to go with a strong El Nino, at least in December. And we're on the extreme side of something, and that alone is exciting. So I'll take it for now at least and see what happens.
But so before we get into our weather in the Twitterverse, I wanted to give a shout out to someone who helped us out with the show, a very small part, um, and that's Brad Gay. He did the voice for our intro, which ironically you didn't hear this time because we were having a little bit of an audio issue. But we'd like to thank Brad for lending us his deep chocolatey voice for all of our episodes.
Yes, thank you, Brad, for adding to that. I must say the open is spectacular. I wondered if you actually had someone else make it, but you made it. Um, and
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
not sure how I did that.
so yeah, we'll get it back sometime soon.
Yeah, we're sorry, and also sorry we were a little late tonight. We were having some, as they call them, technical issues, technological issues, actually.
Well, we are stretching the bounds of technology as it is. I mean, I'm coming to this show tonight from my iPhone, and even that aside, we're streaming on the internet. It's not a whole lot of years old.
Yeah, certainly it will be improved in the future. So let's jump right into our trending in the weather Twitterverse for this week. Our first tweet comes from Brad Panovich. He's a chief meteorologist in Charlotte, North Carolina. You can follow him at WXBrad on Twitter. He tweeted out something that said, Hurricane Sandra off the Pacific coast of Mexico tonight. And it has I think it's an infrared imagery of the hurricane uh, closing in on Mexico. And then he followed it up with another tweet that I'm going to try to my very best to say this. Huracán Sandra frente a la costa del Pacífico de Mexico esta noche. And I thought that was interesting that he tailored his tweet to the audience that would be impacted by this tropical cyclone. Tyler, what is your take on this? Have you ever had to tailor certain shares or forecasts for a certain audience?
I've never had to do anything in another language. My first thought when I saw it was it's pretty neat, but at the same time, doesn't every website have a link that says, "Do you want to translate now?" Even when it doesn't need to be translated, like the PSU e-wall.
I
So,
I thought the same thing actually.
a neat idea, but I think I think there's software out there that'll do the job. And for me personally, I don't know any other language, so that's a waste of time for me because it would
Yeah,
take away from actually figuring out what's going on.
yeah. I'm assuming he probably used a translator himself. I actually I don't know if he speaks Spanish, but um, most likely he probably used a translator because when you actually translate his English tweet, it goes to the exact same thing. That
Okay.
yeah.
They
I
were
just
they were separate tweets, right?
yeah, they were two separate
Okay.
tweets. Yeah, yeah. I just thought it was interesting. If might be a little easier for someone down there to see this and maybe see a hashtag or something that was, if you search on Twitter with certain words, you're not going to get the English version if you're typing in Spanish words. Um, so that's one aspect, that maybe helped him out or helped people out. Sorry, that were looking at the tweet. So our next tweet comes from. Sorry, one moment. Comes from Mark Vogan. You can follow him at Mark Vogan on Twitter, and he tweeted out a picture of the current North America snow cover with the caption, "Warm U.S. December opens with a record snow cover." And Obviously, the United States snow cover, for all you weather weenies out there that have been following it, is really confined to the western half of the United States, and the east, maybe the tip of the northernmost part of Maine has some some snow cover, but other than that, it's just the north, like, western, central, northwest area of the United States. Um, and it's interesting though because a lot of the forecasts for December are warmth, warmer than normal, I should say. Yet we have quite a bit of snow cover across uh, not just North America, but the entire northern hemisphere in some of the higher latitudes.
Yeah, didn't it say this was one of it set some type of record?
Yeah, it looks like the record goes back to 2003, and I think it was the most on December 1st. 38% of the lower 48 snow covered, which is the most for this date since at least 2003 when records began. So that's a pretty short record, but yeah, historical record, but it's still a record since we've been recording it. Um,
My first thought when I saw this was, oh geez, I haven't seen this before. I haven't seen anyone talking about it, so I was wondering why it hadn't made the rounds on Twitter, at least gone viral. I
my,
I don't know how much of a how relevant this is or how useful it is.
right. My sense for why it hasn't made the rounds yet is because it looks like well, the biggest thing that you can see, the biggest kind of difference between last year and this year on the some of the figures in the article are not in the United States, or not even in North America. It looks like Russia and parts of northern Asia. Um, there's a lot more snow cover over there than there was compared to this time last year.
And it's probably more useful if you use the success of a well-known forecaster. His name escapes me right now, but he uses snow cover out in that part of the globe
Uh-huh.
to make a winter forecast. What do you know what his name is?
Was I believe he was on yeah, he was just on the Weather Geeks. His name escapes me as well. Um,
Yeah, he was on with Harvey in Boston, and he visited Penn State as well. But but I'm not sure how much the North America part of the snowfall cover matters. But nonetheless, it was an interesting tweet,
yeah, yeah,
especially
agreed.
especially with the forecast of exceptional warmth in that exact area in Canada in North America as we go through the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's exactly what caught my eye. Um, and maybe some of the reason it's warm. Good segue leads to our next tweet from James Warner. You can follow him at MetmanJames on Twitter. His tweet says, "Polar vortex looks about as unbreakable and linear as it gets at the moment. Needs a perturbation via a wave break." And he tweeted out a picture of, it looks like, temperatures at 10 hectopascals on the stratosphere. And what you kind of can get from this is that all that cold air is locked up um, in the Arctic area, in the polar area, and it's kind of just one large circle around the pole. And when you get colder outbreaks in parts of Europe and North America, that that circle has to break a little bit, and then that cold air can dive down into some of the lower latitudes. So until that happens, I think we're going to see fairly warmer than average weather for the next month.
Yeah, I certainly think that El Nino is behind the warmth that we're going to see in December, and we'll see when or if the polar vortex will dive south. I mean, there's nothing saying that it has to, right? So um, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. But last winter was definitely on the exceptional side of the scale in terms of how sustained the blasts of cold were in the eastern U.S. So I don't think we should be expecting the same thing to happen just because it happened last year.
Yeah, that's true. There's always a lot of things going on, and you can't just focus on El Nino, La Nina, or NAO, or any sort of um, type of parameter that helps describe the climate. There's always, they're always interacting with each other. That's a good point. Um, and on to our next tweet, a little bit of a lighter kind of feel for the show. Patrick Marsh, I believe he works for the National Weather Service. Um, he he tweeted out a link to an article on FoxNews.com. It was a opinion piece from Huckabee, and basically, I won't get into the article that in that much detail. That's not the point of the tweet. Basically, Huckabee was saying we need a president that's a commander in chief and not a meteorologist in chief. So all the weather people picked up on that meteorologist in chief because it has a kind of funny ring to it. And his tweet says, "It's high time we had a meteorologist in chief. Today, I'm forming an exploratory committee to run for this position." So Tyler, my question for you, if you could pick a meteorologist in chief, who would you choose?
For the country?
For the country, the United States of the atmosphere.
Oh, that would take more thought than I could put in here in the next 10 minutes. That would be
Give me one, just a name.
one name, John Neese.
Oh, that is a great answer. I didn't even think of that him as a choice. I was thinking of people who are involved on social media a little bit more and on TV. Oh man, he would be a great commander, meteorologist in chief.
I think you would, yes.
My answer, so I actually tweeted out a poll on Twitter because we can do that nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
And so I asked everyone, who would you elect as your meteorologist in chief? And the choices were James Spann, Marshall Shepard, which, sorry, Dr. Shepard, I spelled your name wrong on the poll, and Ginger Z, and Eric Holfoss. I think that's how you say his last name. And it's a tight race right now. James Spann and Marshall Shepard are both tied at 38%, closely followed by Ginger Z at 15%. So in this case, your vote does matter. If I could choose, this is kind of a underdog wild card pick, but I think I would go with Ian Livingston. I really kind of agree with a lot of the things that he says on. Well, I've never met him and haven't had any real life interaction with him, but the stuff I see on social media is very good, and he has a nice sense of humor. So I don't think he would have to be a third party candidate. I don't think he could be in one of the either of the main parties.
And our next tweet?
Yes, our next tweet is from the one and only James Spann. He's a meteorologist, TV meteorologist, and he's the host of Weather Brains, which is, the side note, is actually some of the inspiration for this show is Weather Brains, because that's kind of the de facto weather podcast. And his tweet, the important part of his tweet wasn't actually what he said. He said climate, politics, and religion, and then linked to an article that he wrote on Medium.com. And if you are any sort of weather enthusiast, I highly suggest taking a minute and reading this. Basically, what he is talking about is how we are, as a weather community, as a climate science community, there are a lot of kind of unhealthy interactions that we have with each other when it comes arguing climate change, for instance. And then he draws it back to politics, because unfortunately climate change is a political thing now. And then he talks about religion and how there are some kind of negative stigmas attached to people of certain faiths when it comes to science. And it was a really, really great piece. So Tyler, how do you deal with climate change when you have to talk about it in a public setting?
how do I deal with it? I just I preface everything with kind of what we know, in that it's unfortunately it's been politicized, and I often will lay out what other people think and then what I think, and kind of as there's no right or wrong, but I like to make sure that as much is understood as possible. I really don't have strong opinions
Mm,
about climate change, but and so that's what plays into why I try to offer up what is going on, the latest happenings, and what people believe. That's usually the path I take.
gotcha. So it sounds like he kind of has a maybe to him it's a similar approach, but he doesn't. He's kind of it sounds like he's a skeptic of a lot of the things that are out there right now.
I read the article that he had, and I loved it. I mean, I saw it get shared by a decent number of people that seemed to like it as well, and but I don't really get too heated on the subject because I don't think it's worth it. But I think it really helps us lead into our discussion tonight, which is a good one.
Yeah, you're right. It kind of goes right into what our main topic is, and the title of the episode today is "What Should We Agree On?" And this is kind of talking about, well, not kind of, but exactly talking about climate science and some of the things that we know. Before we get into that, I just wanted another shout out. JP, I think it's Kolb. Sorry if I said your name wrong. But you're tweeting at us during the show, and it's awesome. It's like we're live tweeting and interacting with each other while we're broadcasting. That's what we want. That's great. So thank you for joining us, JP. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them our way. We'll be glad to take them. Um, so climate science came into the topic for this week because we have something going on in the next week and a half relating to climate science, and that is the climate summit in Paris. And I don't know if many people know that this actually happens every year. That's why it's called COP21. It's the 21st meetings of these type to kind of address climate change. But this year has had a little more coverage and a little more urgency because a lot of people think that it's kind of it'll be a turning point if we can set some sort of guideline. And the two main goals for this summit is to establish some sort of binding guideline for nations across the globe to reduce global warming and stay below a 2 degrees Celsius threshold that and that 2 degrees is 2 degrees above normal from the historical normal. And right now we're at 1 degree above that historical normal, and they want to prevent us from getting to 2. And the second main goal is changing the way um, we progress as a world. As more countries are developing, we have to. The goal is to change how that happens and hopefully make it a little more environmentally friendly. Tyler, what have you seen so far from this climate summit?
I haven't seen a whole lot other than some bashing on Twitter,
Hmm.
bashing some things that are being said, and I think especially when people try to bring up the national security thing in light of all the things that have been going on recently, it's a touchy subject, and it would be any time, but especially now. Um, but I think you want to start out with some of the ground points of a healthy discussion, or some things that everyone should agree on.
Yeah, yeah, sure. That's a great way to start it. So my kind of view, just to give you a background, my area of study right now at Colorado State is the carbon cycle, is climate science. So I've really immersed myself into the issues and to the science of the climate. And I've discovered that inside the climate science research community, there really isn't much disagreement when it comes to um, the kind of the basic understanding and um, anthropogenic part of global warming. There's not much of a disagreement. Where the disagreements do come is how global warming impacts our weather and our overall climate, which we know as climate change. So there's really no big issue on global warming, but climate change is kind of the harder thing to pin down because our weather is so volatile and so interconnected. Um, and outside of the climate science community, I've discovered there's infinitely more disagreement on both global warming and climate change. So my approach to it has been not to if you're gonna have a conversation about, well, how our climate's changing and how our weather's changing, you really need to be an expert on climate change. You need to read the research, or at least read summaries of the research. And there are hundreds and hundreds of papers actually thousands of papers that have been published on climate change, and they all are important to some degree. I've read dozens and dozens of papers on climate science and climate change, and I still don't have the most perfect overall view um, of how our climate is changing and how our weather's changing. But what I have discovered is that we need to agree on eliminating the burning of fossil fuels. And that might seem kind of like, yeah, okay, I've heard that before. But it's not for the reason that you might think. Um, it's for a reason that you can't really deny no matter what. And that is, at some point, we're going to run out of fossil fuels. We're going to run out of oil. We're going to run out of gas. And we're going to run out of coal. Um, that's just how it is. There's a finite amount of those things. And as much as we want to continue burning those things, we need we're going to need more and more energy, and we have the resources to make energy from nature, from the sun, from wind, and I don't think there's any way getting around that point. Um, and Tyler, I'll let you talk for a moment. Sorry, this is a long rant.
No, so that's point number one, your point about fossil fuels. I agree that we should move away from them because it's cleaner to not burn them, and it is a limited supply. With that being said, I don't think we should kill ourselves or go bankrupt over doing so quickly. So I think we should move towards cleaner energy as quickly as we can without causing a lot of issues. For example, I'm not going to go out and spend a fortune on a completely electric car and then not be able to drive where I want to drive because I'm limited and there's not enough charging stations, or the capacity is not long enough, or the technology is not there. I'm just not going to do it. But I would do it if I could pay the same amount of money as I would for a normal car, and if I could go the same range, I'd have absolutely no problem doing it. It'd be exciting to do it. So there are definitely issues that need to be resolved, and it's not all great news and oh yeah, let's jump on the bandwagon. There are things that have to be worked out before it's going to work. But yeah, I agree. I mean, we got to get rid of the burning of fossil fuels, but it's going to take a long time.
You're absolutely right, and that's my kind of understanding of it is that we need those people to get oil and to get natural gas. There's no doubting that, and that's kind of sort of kind of frowned upon when I talk about that with some of my colleagues. You know, I have a lot of friends who went into petroleum engineering and now work for Exxon and or BP, and I don't you know, dislike them because they went into that area. We need those people to get oil and to get natural gas to fuel our energy and our economy. So I think you're right. It has to be a gradual changeover, and I think we are seeing that. But I'd hope it'd be a little faster. But we are still seeing that, which is a good sign.
The other thing that James Spann brought up was the science is settled argument. What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, so I I think the sentence "our globe is warming."
I think it's completely true.
Yeah, I think the science is settled on that. Um,
You can't doubt what the thermometers are saying. So I mean, I guess yeah, that is science, and in that regard, the science is settled. But when I think of that statement, I think of like research. I think of not quite observations. I think of things that are not observations, like forecasts or going forward. And that is where I completely agree that, I mean, science by definition is changing. And when I think of it, I think of the medical field. You know, how many times do you hear, oh, this is going to kill you, or this is going to cause cancer, or this is going to cause heart disease, and then 12 months later, oh no, this is good for you. Constantly changing, year
right.
to year, but especially decade to decade, or you go back 30 or 40 years. And I don't have any great examples because I didn't look into it, but I'm sure there are some. And that exists across science, not just in the medical field. And in meteorology, things change. There becomes better ways to do things, and we learn new processes. And so when people come out and say, oh, this is set in stone, I kind of cringe because things change. Certainly the consensus is there, but it's not etched in stone.
Yeah. So that's a great point, and I think the other part of the science being settled is the anthropogenic aspect of global warming. That's kind of where the biggest division is in the general public. And I think that science is also settled. Obviously, our globe goes through climate changes naturally, but over a much longer period of time than we've seen in the past century.
So
Um,
you think the science is settled, and you have a decent amount of experience in that area because, as you said, you're studying something like that, or the carbon cycle
yes.
right now. Um,
But when it comes to weather, when it comes to I to give you an overview, the there's kind of this narrative that the storms they're gonna be rainier storms because a warmer atmosphere can hold more water. That's via the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, and the wetter places are going to get wetter, and the drier places are going to get drier, and that has to do with the Hadley cell and kind of the strengthening of subsidence and rising motion. And I, when it comes to that, I think there's a lot of good science behind that, especially Clausius-Clapeyron. Obviously, warmer air can hold more water, and it's going to rain more when it does rain. But when it comes to severe weather, um, I think it's a little more. there's more wiggle room or there's less settled of the science, I should say.
Well, when you look at the publications, it's clear that there is no established link to tornadoes.
Yeah.
So are you talking about something other than that?
Um, yeah, tornadoes, wind, hail, the three
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
the three things. And also when it comes to one of the biggest things to talk about is hurricanes and tropical systems. Um, so I do agree that I don't think the science is settled when it comes to how is global warming impacting our weather. Um, and that's why people are researching it still, and that's why it's an interesting field of study. Um,
So back to your point about the increased CO2, obviously man-made and the whole anthropogenic argument. My stance on that is, you look at the graph that everyone shows, and the graph is you have the black line is observed temperatures over so many years. Then you have the model runs that do not take into account either the increase in CO2 or CO2 altogether. I'm not exactly sure, but it takes out some impact of CO2, and those models completely stray from the observed. And then the other grouping of models completely or basically matches the observed line when you include the increased CO2 as a result of human activity. I think that's great that it matches, but I don't know that it would be etched in stone that that's completely linked. Maybe I would agree 99%, but and I've been trying to think of other examples of how things match, but it's really something else that's causing it to match. Um,
so you're talking about correlation over causation, essentially.
Probably.
Yeah, yeah. So if something can be correlated, but there's no cause and effect between um, the
Yes,
the two
yes,
things. And so you're talking about the RCP, the different scenarios. Um, there's I believe it's
yes.
so some of the more famous ones are RCP 2.6, and it goes all the way up to RCP 8.5, and those are from the CMIP 5 models, which is interesting because that is a model that's heavily studied here at Colorado State. So you're saying that some of the scenarios is what the models have projected already, or some of the observations is what the models have already projected.
Basically, in the past, when you go back and mimic the past and see what would happen.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's something that climate scientists strive for, or climate models strive for, is to replicate the past, because that means your model has done well in the past, so it should do well in the future. That's something called model tuning, and I've had to do it several times in my research. Um, yeah, so that's a good point. And I think we can bring it back now to the climate summit in Paris. And we had a question from a fellow Penn Stater. I believe he's still in school right now. Andy Moffat. I hope I said that right. You can follow him at Weather Prophet very clever, on Twitter. And he studied meteorology, and he asked, in your opinions, do you think any action will be taken based of discussions at the summit? Seems like nothing ever gets done. So in the past 21 years, they have come to agreements, and most notably the Kyoto Protocol. I believe it was 1997, and the U.S. actually was part of this agreement. And basically, the agreement was to lower emissions of greenhouse gases, not just CO2, different types of greenhouse gases. And they had the agreement, and it was binding, but the U.S. dropped out. I think it was 2001. Um, we said we're not going to do this anymore, basically. And at other meetings, they have come to less broad and less binding agreements, for the entire a lot of countries in the world, and so they do get things done at these summits. I think it's safe to say that there is a lot of good that comes out of these summits. I think when you say do you think any action will be taken, will there be any new binding kind of contract between there's almost 200 countries that are represented at this thing, and I think you're asking, will there be another contract that will be binding to lower emissions from different countries? I got to be honest, I don't have that much insight into what the negotiations between different countries. A lot of it's going to come down to the United States and China, and we've seen progress there. Just I think it was in the spring, sometime this year. Obama and President Obama and the Secretary of State John Kerry came out and they made some progress with China in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So I am optimistic. I'm very optimistic. I think the harder part is going to be following the agreement, which we've seen we haven't had the best of luck in the past with that.
Two comments to add to what you've said. One is China has a major problem with pollution. There was a satellite image circulating the other day of the massive amounts of pollution over the country. So that just goes to show you how this is a global problem, and we could do all we want in the United States, and it doesn't matter unless everyone else gets on board. That's one comment I have. Number two.
Can I follow up? Let me follow up real quick on that.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. China is the leading CO2 emitter in the world, but when it comes to per person, the U.S. is far and above the highest emitter. And so the scary part of all that is what happens when China and India and Africa start to live the lifestyle that we live in the United States. That's the really, really scary part about that. And so that's why we need to implement certain standards and other ways of energy, because when those I said Africa like it was a country, but those three different countries / continents start to develop more, and every person in those countries are developing. That's when it's kind of nightmare scenario.
So you're saying here in the United States, per person, we emit more CO2 than those countries?
Than those countries per person, yeah.
My other remark was, you say binding agreement. What does binding mean if the last major binding agreement we dropped out of?
Well, yeah, what kind of action, what's our punishment, right?
Yeah, was there any?
I don't think so, no. But at least not that none that was noticeable or that crippled us in any way.
So, back to his question, do you think anything will come out of it? I don't have the slightest idea. But
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if anything does. I think we certainly have more pressing issues ongoing right now. But what did anything come out of last year's?
Yeah, I actually I forget what happened last year. Wait a minute, I had it up real quick. Yeah, 2014 COP20. It was in Peru, and sorry, I don't see anything. What came out of it? I'm sure there were some. Let's see. The overarching goal of this conference was the same. I don't see anything that looks kind of broad. I think the biggest thing is getting the major developing countries and the already developed countries to agree on something. Um, that's the biggie.
So it seems like they've been trying to do this for several years.
21 years.
So it wouldn't be surprising if this year was no different than many of the others. Um,
I do think that there's been more. I think every year that this conference continues, there's going to be more kind of support or pressure from the public. Um, and I think maybe that's why, as we go on, um, that and we may see some of the impacts um, of global warming. I think sea level rise is probably the thing that would really make people wake up um, and start to make countries wake up and start to do something. Um, sorry, I interrupted you. I
no, I think you were adding to the conversation.
Yes. So we have some more questions on Twitter if you want to take them.
Good, yes.
So let's see. What are some? This is from Paul M. You can follow him at Paul_weather on Twitter. He's a Penn State University meteorology undergrad. Hello, fellow Penn Stater. What are some possible tipping points and positive feedbacks we might encounter with future warming? So there are a few positive feedbacks that we see when it comes to global warming. I think the most obvious one is sea or ice melt in polar and Arctic regions, and when you get ice melt, specifically sea ice melt, um, you lower the albedo of that surface, and that means sunlight that would be reflecting off of ice is now being absorbed into the ocean, and that means we get more solar radiation and potentially more warming at those locations, and that's actually why areas in the Arctic are some of the fastest warming areas on the globe. Another major one is ocean ocean uptake in CO2 um, and carbon, I should say. And as you increase the temperature of water, it doesn't the solubility of CO2 goes down. So as our ocean gets warmer, its ability to take in CO2 goes down, and that the ocean is a huge sink for carbon, and it's important for kind of mitigating more carbon going into our atmosphere than does now. So those are the two that come to mind for me. There are certainly more, but those are the two big ones. As far as tipping points, I think that's a little tougher. Tyler, do you have any opinion on a tipping point?
A tipping point for what? What was that again?
It just says what are some possible tipping points we might encounter with future warming. So I guess so I have an answer for this. I think the biggest tipping point that we'll see or that we may see is the sea level rise issue, because once we have areas that are being inundated and unlivable, that's kind of when we have crossed this point where areas are no longer livable and due to global warming. I think that's what he was asking. So thank you, Paul, for that question. So we have one more question, and it's on a little bit of a different topic, but we're going to take it. It's actually from JP, and he asked, may I ask an idea about agreeing on new fields of meteorology, like forecasting airport delays based on the weather? So I guess he's asking we should incorporate some of these new fields of meteorology and make them more available to the public and more relevant in our field. Any thoughts on that, Tyler?
Forecasting airport delays?
Yes, that's his that's his field of specialty. Uh, I know we do that, right?
Yeah, yeah, I would say that that exists. Probably WSI does it.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, we have some fellow graduates of ours that we know that work at Southwest. Um, so yeah, that airline companies do have meteorologists on staff. Um, but I think kind of the broader question that he's asking is when these new fields of meteorology pop up, we should embrace them and uh, and have some sort of workforce behind them, which is that's a topic for a whole other show.
yes.
Because we could really dive into that. Um, so thank you, JP, for the question, and maybe we'll discuss that in a little more depth on a separate show. Um,
Back to a few other roaming thoughts that I had about climate change, because you have me constantly thinking about this. Um, s- well, it's kind of a idealistic question, but if we were able to eliminate all the CO2 emissions and the temperatures kept going up, what would happen then? Um, and another question I had was, uh, let's see.
so your first question, if we were to stop or reduce global warming or
Or
reduce greenhouse gas
eliminate
emissions.
eliminate fossil fuel burning, or totally minimize it to the maximum amount possible.
Okay, so you're talking about the range of what could happen.
My
Like,
question was, if we minimized CO2 emissions to the maximum amount possible
okay,
and temperatures kept rising, what would happen then?
well, they would keep rising, um, because CO2 has a pretty long lifetime in the atmosphere. If it's not taken up by plants or taken up by the ocean, it exists in our atmosphere for quite some time. So we would still warm after we shut off everything. Um, but I see what you're saying. If we got to a certain point where we're like, okay, well, we shouldn't be warming anymore.
Yes, yes.
That is a interesting hypothetical. I think
Or going in reverse,
there would be pitchforks outside of Noah.
if we go back to, you look at the trends of the planet over since it came into existence, and you see lots of ups and downs. If we were to go back before those big ups or big downs, would we have been able to forecast them? I don't know. So my thought is, even though we're going up and say that it's 100% that the CO2 and it's human caused, etched in stone, who is to say that one of these major dips isn't going to come along and totally offset the warming? So my question would be, what is our goal in all of this? What is our goal? So we clean up our act. What's our goal? And I saw, and we didn't really talk about it this episode, but I saw that ongoing quabble or quarreling with someone from Texas and the data from NOAA, and how the guy from Texas was concerned that there was some manipulation going on.
hmm
What's his goal? What is everyone's goal in all of this? Do we really think that we can reverse what's going on? Aside from cleaning up, what's our goal? Is it just
That
to clean up?
well, so I think the kind of the bigger the more important part of um, knowing and having the ability to know what our weather can do and have the forecast of what our weather can do is limiting the damage that it does, because I mean the weather inherently it's it's why we, the lower troposphere weather down there is why we can live and why we can breathe and all that. But it also causes a lot of destruction, um, and not necessarily or not at all because of global warming. It's just that's the nature of the weather. Um,
So we want to understand how this change may impact the weather in the future.
yeah, so we can, yeah, exactly. So we can prepare, um, and take some precautions in areas that might be susceptible to more extreme or less extreme or um, different types of weather patterns. Um,
That makes sense.
right, and so you talked about some of the geological our geological time record or temperature record, um, and we do go through these cycles, and a lot of them they're over millions and millions of years. So um, if there were changes because of those, you know, not no one person or no like 5 generations, probably even more than that, would ever see a difference due to something like that. Um, and those are generally caused by um, our tilt. The Earth's tilt kind of wobbles, um, and it changes from over geological timescales, and that's a big one that impacts that. Um, you mentioned Lamar Smith, the representative out of Texas.
Yes.
Yeah, we're actually going to discuss that next week, and we're going to have a special guest, um, a a faculty here at CSU. He's a I guess his main area of research is chemistry, but he has worked for NOAA and he was the head of a NOAA center. So he's going to chime in on what he thinks about that. Um, so it should be a really interesting show because the NOAA and government feud is just sorry, the NOAA and Congress feud is just getting deeper and deeper, and more things are happening every week. So
Yes.
I think we're about done. Tyler, any last thoughts on what we should agree on?
Um, no, I think a quick recap would be healthy. We definitely should agree to clean up our act. We should agree that the temperatures are rising based on thermometers that are correctly calibrated. I mean, there's no doubting that the temperatures are going up. Um, and I think we should all agree that in some areas we should have questions and not always rest easy on some of the findings that we already have. I know we maybe didn't agree on everything there, but I think there's too much certainty in a lot of areas of science and even meteorology. And I think a lot of that feeling I get from people that have been doing what they do for 30 years. I think there's something to be said for experience, in getting burned and being wrong in what it teaches you.
Hmm.
So a little bit less certainty in a lot of areas. And I realize you got to be deliberate, and in some things as a leader you got to make a decision. But in a lot of things in science, I think we should be a little bit more skeptical. Um,
And Tyler, the some of the best science happens when two scientists disagree and they um, provide results, and different scientists chime in, and eventually there's a consensus, and that's that's where the best science happens, right? That's when you read a publication and you're like, wait a minute, these methods. Was that the best way to do it, or what about this model? Their parameters, I think they could be a little bit better, a little bit different. So I think it's a great point. You
it,
have
it, in one final, what would you call it, probing question before we hang up for this week. Um, the other thing that comes up all the time is the difference, the fundamental difference in the type of models that are used to forecast weather and the type of models that are used to forecast climate. The ones that we use for weather are initial condition models, and the ones that forecast climate are boundary value models. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
So
A lot of times the climate models use past weather.
they use a totally different way of calculating things. So my statement or my question would be basically or simply, tell us more about how these boundary value models work and give me a few examples of how they've been wrong and a few examples of how they've been right. So that could probably be a future episode.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. This has been this is a heavy episode. We could talk for another hour about this. Um, so thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm very encouraged by some of the questions we have. So please come back next week, Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll gladly take your questions. And next week, like I said, we'll have a faculty scientist from Colorado State, and he's going to chime in on the Congress and NOAA issues that are going on right now. You can follow us on Twitter at the Weather Junkies, the WX Junkies, and we have a Facebook page as well. And you can listen to this podcast on YouTube, SoundCloud, or iTunes. For Tyler and myself, thank you for joining us. See you next week.